It's all good.
All right.
Seriously. Okay, we're live. We're happening. So I am so excited to have you here, Tanya. You're a good friend of mine. You've been a client of mine. You've been a colleague of mine. And really, all these are what I decided was at the end of last year, I heard so many people saying, "Oh, I can't wait for this year to be finished, and we're going to have this great new year." And I was like, yeah, you know what? It'll be great if you change things, if you don't do things exactly the same. And so one of the ways I know of doing that is by creating an awareness of how can we actually learn from each other? How can we have conversations that are just everyday conversations, but maybe looking through a particular lens. And so for me, my theme for the year is looking, seeing humanity. And one of the things I talk about a lot is, humanity having seeing humanity as stakeholders at the decision table. Hey, Tanya Allen is on here. Hello, ladies. She's been probably waiting patiently for us to come on. Welcome. And so Tanya, that's going to be
easy for you.
Tanya A and Tanya N. So Tanya, this is really just us having conversations that I don't know, I often feel really just amazed at every conversation I get to have with friends, colleagues, leaders across the world. And it's just insights that often we don't have these conversations. Often there's not an openness for a conversation to be had. And in fact, I was on a team meeting just before I came on here, which is why we're a couple of minutes later. And that was one of the things that came up is in that particular company, we don't necessarily have those spaces where we can have a conversation like we're going to have today, where it's I don't know, for us to have, and this is what I'm looking at. I'm looking at writing a white paper. I've started doing it since I've began these conversations. And the white paper is looking at a new approach, or I feel there's a need for a new approach to leadership. And so for us to have this new approach, I feel like we need different conversations, or a willingness to have conversations to find out, well, what does that actually mean for you? And what are you doing? And what are you seeing? Because you look through a very, very different lens, literally through a lens. And you're very involved within the culture of your background, your heritage as well. And so you're seeing things that I'm not getting to see because that's not what I've been using, that lens. And so that's what these conversations are around. We don't know where we go with them. We just begin to have a conversation just like you and I would if we weren't pressing a button and going live, right? You just might have a few people listening in, a few people commenting, asking questions, that sort of thing, right? Are you up for it?
Sure.
What's the weather like in and I go weather because I'm interested what's happening in New Zealand right now.
Okay. I've got a great tan.
So is it sunny as there?
I've been swimming every day out in the open. It's been great. Today's just meant to be thunderstorms, but we're good. 26 degrees is like 34 in Manly. It's a different kind of experience.
Well, it's actually been really stormy over here. Lots of rain over here, with a few gaps of. That's why I was wondering what the weather was like over there. I don't normally ask about weather, but I'm just interested.
Well, we were really fortunate because we had a really cold snap on I think it was Boxing Day, and so we got all the snow. So being a photographer and just having opened an online store for mountain photos, that was a dream. So when we have weird weather, then we just all look to the mountains, see, what's going on in the mountain, and then you have thousands of tourists wanting to go up to the mountain to look at the snow. So there's lots of bonuses that come with our randomness.
Yeah. Hey, Tammy, I know you've had some learnings from last year. What have been some learnings for you from last year?
One of the biggest ones was actually slowing down and realizing that I'd been running like in the full flight mode, and I had a lot of a lot of tasks that I wanted to achieve to move me forward, and make me feel like I'm representing my business brand in the best way. And so I think I was half dead by the time I finished the year. Having 2 days off, it gave me time to, from Christmas onwards, just realizing how important it is to listen to your body and be in your body, because I've probably spent a lot of time out of my body, so to speak. And that's been a big learning, and not having anxiety, and not even realizing I had anxiety by being so busy. And so now just stepping back.
So what are some of those things that you're seeing now that you're being more aware and in your body? Tell us that.
Maybe being more understanding of my emotions and my experiences, and then also realizing my vibration and how I can actually be in charge of my own vibration of what I put out to, and how I can actually be more able to be in charge of my my emotions, I should say.
Why do you think you haven't been in charge of your emotions? Like, I don't know about you, but for me, when I wasn't in charge, when I wasn't allowing, I think that's what, for me, it was allowing me to feel that. I knew they were there. I just didn't want to go there because it was either too hard or too scary, right? Or I just didn't have the strategies to be able to go, how do I deal with this? And actually, that I think this way looks much nicer. And it was never the nicer way, because I was ignoring and procrastinating or not dealing with, right? And so I would, and human race is, we tend to, as humans, go to something that we are more like certain about, even though it might be painful, and not go on the uncertain pathway. For you, what was that like? Why were you not so in tune with your emotions in that way?
I think it was, I've gone through a relationship breakdown, so there was lots more heightened emotions, and probably just getting through the stages of accepting what is, and also then just changing, because I've done lots of study and lots of science of how things work and how we think. However, there's just days where you just go, oh my God, I feel really crap. And then bringing myself back out of it, and then feeling really good and go, oh, I'm all good now. And then like, oh, I'm not so good now. But understanding, I've been doing some equine therapy. So I actually have a client who has 8 horses. So I had to work with her, and then she was wanting to work with me. So I got to actually also experience equine therapy and realizing.
Tell us more about that. I've always been interested in that. I know about it, but I don't know much about it.
Yeah, so they have a dual sensory system. So they're very present. There's no thinking into the future and worrying about the past, but they're aware of what has happened in the past to make them be safe. They also feel they can sense what's going on with the people around them, including myself. And they taught me lots of lessons. Like, I had no idea what they are able to do, but they can. I think there was. They can sense all of your behaviors and how you're feeling, and then they can take on role plays of other people in your life who you need to learn some lessons from, to be whether you need to be stronger or stand up or have a voice. It's really
how give me an example. Like, that's fascinating. Wow.
So I went there I had to do a keynote speak at my high school, and
I remember you talking about that one.
Yeah, speaking in public for a period of time has always been a bit of a stressor, but I thought, well, I've done a lot of personal development. I should be sweet, but it's all your peers and ones you went to school with and everything. Anyway, so I went there I want to have a voice, because I've always had some challenges around feeling heard or having a voice, and within myself about how I felt about myself. So when I went through this really interesting experience, it was a little horse, a miniature horse, and then a wild horse a Kaimanawa horse, a very big horse, and the horse was completely interested in me. I was more attracted to the bigger horse. So the big horse was most interested in me. He let me pet him, and I had his full attention. And then as time went by, he started like moving away from me, going over into the corner of the paddock, and then but looking back at me, just like, no, I'm not so interested in you now, but I want to see what you're doing. And then he started getting aggressive and stamping his foot, looking away from me and stamping his hoof,
like attention kind of thing,
becoming aggressive, kind of slightly aggressive. Yeah, unsettled. And then when it was time for me to go into the paddock, I went into the paddock of that horse, and then he came up to me and he was trying to push me away with his nose, like, so he was being quite aggressive with me. I was like, oh, and I was trying to pet him, and he was just like keep pushing me away, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. And the person who's running this, she's like, I'm not meant to tell you anything, but you need to stand up to this horse. Like, you need to stand up to him. He's bullying you. Yeah. I was like, okay. So I just stood my ground and didn't move after he'd done it a few times. And he then, and she said, what are you feeling? And I could feel really blocked in my throat and my neck. And that's all part of that not having a voice. So I was feeling emotions and also feeling emotions about my stuff. And the horse then raised his head above me, almost like to show superiority. And then he moved to the side and he let out these big gasps, and she said he's letting go of your whatever it is that your blockages are. I'm like, what? And I could feel something easing within me. It was really bizarre. And then he moved away and he was much calmer because I stood my ground, and he kept looking at me, looking back, and then he came back and he let me pat him, and but then he still tried to push me away, but not as much. And the coach, she'd say she would call herself a coach, she just said, he's saying you've still got a way to go. But he's like, I stood my ground, and I felt I mean, a lot of emotions and different experiences, but he basically took on the personality of someone very close to me, and I was like, holy moly. So,
isn't that amazing?
Yeah. And it was like the lesson there was like standing my ground and having a voice. So I've done about 5 sessions. Yeah, there were a lot of other experiences too, and one of the really big ones was around boundaries. So I traditionally, being a photographer and working with people, I am privy to some interesting experiences, and my role is to help people relax and have them trust me so that they can be their too. So I've kind of the boundaries of what probably would be for a lot of other people weren't there. So when I might ask them questions or talk to them about things that are probably maybe they're more personal and they wouldn't normally open up to other people about certain things, or just I'm just in a different position. And my parents are teachers and my sister, so their role is sort of thing. So I realized that I never had boundaries around what was probably appropriate sometimes, and also confiding in people with more information than I needed to. So not actually having personal boundaries as much as I could have. So one of the lessons I said I wanted to learn was around boundaries. And one of the horses actually that I worked with was really basically a wild horse. So it let me go really close to it, and then I went to just touch it, and he jolted and moved away, and I was like, oh. And then she's like, well, what is that telling you? I'm like, well, I just rocked on up there. I didn't really say hi. So I'm feeling really relaxed.
Good, Kyle.
The horse will think I'm cool. And I'm like, oh, and he just moved away. And I was like, okay, all right. And she said, well, practice grounding yourself. So that's been one of the things I've been learning is, so where am I in my body? What am I feeling in my body? What am I thinking? And then how's my breath? So every time I grounded myself, I had a different response from the horses. So that's that part of like always being in flight mode, you're not grounded. And so I wanted to learn more about being grounded. And in New Zealand, or in Māori culture, we say Mother Earth is, Papa Tuanuku, and the Sky Father is Rangi and Papa. So the coach expressed it's like being grounded in your solar plexus. It's like a spiral coming up from the ground and one from the earth, and then meeting in the middle, and that's in your solar plexus that you're grounded. So that was, for me, that was a really good way of understanding about grounding, and being more, just bearing my breath, because I've lived my whole life up here and not in my body.
Yeah,
that's what we've sort of discovered over the last couple of years. And the horse, anyway, with the horse, when I grounded myself, I went back to the horse and tried to touch the horse again, and I got so close, I felt like I could touch I don't know if you say the hair. And then he moved away again, and then she said, look, I'm just going to let you know, this horse is a wild horse and he won't even let me touch him. But she said what the lesson there was that some people have boundaries and they will not let you in. Like, you can get so close, but they just will not let you past a certain point. And my recent past relationship of a few years, that's basically where it was at. So it was kind of a lesson of like, okay, it's not actually me, it's actually also, well, it is me, but it's also that some people have boundaries that they won't let you penetrate as far as a relationship goes. If you've chosen someone who is very protective of their own heart, then they will not let you in any further past a certain point. So that was.
And how will you take this, what you've learned in that way, into what you do in your professional life? I think obviously working a lot on your personal, but we know that this comes into our professional, right? So how will this affect what you're doing?
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes when I'm excited and I love to connect with people, it might be that breathing a little bit faster than I need to, or talking a little bit faster, talking a lot. That's been a pattern of my whole life, is actually talking a lot, and actually realizing silence sometimes is really powerful too. When you're with other people, you don't have to be talking. Like, they might have something to say that you're not letting them, giving them the opportunity to say.
I love that. I love everything that you're saying, and just that awareness of our emotions in our body, but like just even those learnings, like so powerful. And if you think of like the bigger picture of, if we're to look at a new approach to leadership and we take that into leadership, what if we were more aware of our emotions as a leader? What if we were more able to bring that to the table? How would that change, and what would that look like? Any thoughts or insights around that? Because here's the thing while you're thinking, because I do think that in leadership, you said a couple of things and I go, because in leadership, we often, as a leader, you can feel, oh, I don't want to speak up, because if I speak up, who's not going to like what I've got to say? Who's going to judge me on that? What is, and so I think of when you were talking about that block and having a voice, look, I see that a lot across the globe with leaders that, some feel they just don't have a voice, or they have a small voice here. But if they were to bring what they bring to leadership, which is a little bit different to what maybe is the norm out there, that they would be ridiculed, they'd be judged, they would be, like even that therapy in which you've been involved, I've heard of that, and I thought, oh, that's so powerful, because I know with special needs that often it has amazing results, and I've even considered it for one of my children.
Well, I have a psychotherapist in Sydney who was a client who I actually worked with. I'm her client for a couple of years, and she goes overseas every year to study even further. Like, she was in Norway when lockdown happened and blah blah blah. Anyway, she said that's something that she had heard a lot about and was really fascinated. And she said that with some of the things that I'd held onto from childhood, she said no amount of talking is going to get rid of it. And she said with the horse therapy, that's where the most, there'll be so much value. But getting back to your question, with regard to leadership and having a voice and that sort of thing, I was probably looking at, well, what is it that will help me have my voice even more to develop? And for me in New Zealand, I realise we have a massive race discussion. It's not it's not pretty. There's around race. However, how can I help and contribute? Is that I hadn't taken that step to learn my own language. So I actually took that step on Boxing Day. I registered for Te Reo Māori, so for me to learn my own language, because when you're having race issues, they come up all the time, or you can just, you have people making comments, oh, he's a typical Maori, and you're like, and what does a typical Māori look like? You know, and like, I'm sitting here and I'm right there and I'm Māori and you're just saying something like that. You know, it's like a white middle class older race of people who have all these issues around who we are as people, that don't understand what colonization has done and all that sort of thing. And I thought, right, I've got a missing link in my own puzzle, and that is that I don't speak my mother tongue, but it's in my DNA too. So thanks COVID, I'm not traveling backwards and forwards to Sydney, so I've got more time to be in classes to go. And then the more information I have and knowledge around who I am and where I come from and our history of our country, then the better equipped I am not to have aggressive conversations, to have a conversation strategically able to give some information without freaking people out and then them wanting to move away. So that's kind of what I've noticed in New Zealand. Yeah, there's you can just go with the current and just go, oh yeah, people are racist and they just think we're a certain way, and or I can do something, and part of it is to
tell me more of what is happening racially in New Zealand. Would love to know more about that.
Well, what are you seeing? Really, on the positive, there's a huge shift in movement forward within government. Like there are the most Māori politicians we have ever had, and on the bench, and with portfolios, and that is a big, huge step. And in schools, they have
and it seems like because of that, just on that note, it seems like because of that, there's more of an awareness that's given on that platform as well. Am I right in saying that? Or not really?
Yeah. There'd be also people will be really pissed off that there'll be that there are more, and then going, oh god. But the good thing is, what there's noticeably is young children are now being educated in Māori history, the real history, not the colonized version, and they are actually learning how to say.
The Waitangi is all we ever used to hear at school. That was our sort of history, right?
Yeah. Well, it's about the local history as well, because like our province was like millions of acres was fully stolen, and they made us just be like, sound like savages, where we weren't even we didn't fight with guns or anything. We were a pacifist people, but they made us sound like we were aggressive, and they were stealing all our land and making roads through our land and took our land. They all came to Taranaki and were told there's lots of land, but there wasn't, and so our history has been told how it truthfully is. So I think what's happening is younger people are growing up now, and they, Pākehā, so non-Māori people, and locals who live here who are from other countries, they actually are wanting to learn the language, and they are. And they're also really keen to speak respectfully and with the right, pronouncing words right. It's so like Māori, not Maori. Or Taranaki, not Taranaki. So there's this movement where people are starting to understand. So, and younger children are correcting their parents for saying words so I think the younger generation will be more appreciative and understanding as they're taught, whereas older people will just probably always stay that way. But like one of my friends said, these older people are going to wake up in a rest home one day in their 80s, and someone's going to go, kia ora, and they'll be like, they'll be speaking to them, and they'll be like, oh shit, what just happened?
And then they'll go, teno pai. And you'll go, what? No, just kidding.
So on a positive note, there's a huge shift, and there's a massive amount of people who went to school speaking Māori from birth right up, and so there's all these smart young people between 20 and 40, and they are fluent, so they are leading change.
And it's easily accepted in school to be able to be speaking fluently?
Well, see, you have to. So so Jamie just did his, so my ex-partner, Jamie. He just did his teacher's accreditation in New Zealand because he'd only ever taught in Australia. And he had to do an intense few months of retraining, and there was a big section on Māori and Pacifica education. So you would do like karakia, which is like prayer, and you might do you'll use a lot of Māori words within everyday education and learning history and that sort of thing. So that is expected now. So it's actually also a little bit trendy to be able to understand or learn protocols and ways of doing things. So there is.
So that's the positives of it. Like obviously bringing into the next generation, so that it's coming into within the culture. And I remember even as a young girl growing up that, you know, it wasn't even sort of spoken, and then it became very much a part of our environment. And that sounds like it's gone even more into the generations. And we definitely, it was still pretty uncool if you went to Māori studies, right? In the time that I was in high school at school. And yet there was very much, you know, things around the environment were changing. So Māori, you could see the presence of Māori culture into the culture within New Zealand. And I remember that transition as it was beginning to start doing that. So obviously, as time has gone on, there's been an importance to see that it comes in more ways, and yet there's still quite a lot of, I guess, division within that. So tell us a bit more about that, or what you're seeing.
There's really a lot of fear for white people. There's fear around us taking back control and being in charge. But it's the whole idea of the Treaty of Waitangi in the 1800s that we are. So
like, can you, for those that have never heard of the Treaty of Waitangi, can you say like what that is? Yeah.
So there was a treaty between a number of tribes and the Crown, the Europeans, that we share the country. So we allowed that to be an okay thing. They were going to try and take over anyway, but it was, and there were meant to be a certain amount of, there was meant to be equality, and there was not meant to be any land stolen and that sort of thing. But they dishonoured all forms of the treaty. They didn't. We weren't even allowed to vote until I think after the war. Is that right? I think it was after the war. There was you weren't allowed to be a parliamentarian unless you had land, but all our land was stolen, so we didn't have land. We were landless.
So then there was no voice because of that as well, right?
Yeah, it was meant to be that we were become united as two people, but it never actually happened. And so what happens now is people go, oh, that was the 1800s. People just need to move on. And we're like, but hold on. My great-grandparents had everything taken from them, and then they grew up not being whipped for speaking their language. So then they did not want their children to speak English. And so none of us got the language at all, because they knew that to survive, that don't speak the language. So then we have a lack of identity and all of that sort of stuff. So what's happened now is the Crown have paid less than a cent in the dollar for every acre of stolen land, and that's just and there's other things have been settled as well. Like there's been some other arrangements, but it's a big source of pain for all of us. And when I go around the coast and I see all the land that our extended family owned, and then what's left to our tribes is just the edges of close to the sea, and there's just all this amazing land that doesn't belong to us anymore, or that we can't do anything with the land that we have. The farmers have to lease it because we don't have the resources to take it back, so to speak, because the farmers have had it for years. But anyway, I think I digressed. So you were asking.
I think this is really important, because I think this is I love these insights that you're giving, because you began to talk about, say, the Pākehā, the white, and how this was becoming more of a like a knowledge that I guess that they can get, but then in the same way there's a lot of hurt from the past, and how do we kind of bring that into it, right? So you can get knowledge around it, but then there's still the hurt from the fact that there was injustice done.
Yeah, and I think part of the healing is that people who are not Māori, that they actually become curious, that somehow that there's encouragement for them to become curious about what actually did happen, so that they can have some empathy rather than try to stereotype us as a people. Because, to be honest, in our town, there's plenty of white collar, people who run the drugs in our town, and yet we've got gangs also in other parts of the province who are Māori, and they don't look great and they don't give us a good reputation. But what goes on under,
isn't that with everything though, like, right, whether it's
and then there's farmers who put stuff into our rivers and waterways, and our waterways are really important and significant, and that destroys seafood,
especially in the Māori culture, right?
So it's like, well, do you guys talk about that, when you're talking about people that you don't like? But anyway, that's just so for me, it's about having more knowledge, and we'll say more in our kete, more knowledge in our kete, or our basket, so basket of knowledge. So the more that we I guess prepare ourselves to have more knowledge, then the better equipped we can be to help with moving us forward. And part of the healing, as I said, is really being acknowledged. And I think part of the treaty settlements was,
so how as leadership can we acknowledge things like this better? So if this is a new approach to leadership, and we were to do this better as a global leadership across the world, how can we be acknowledging exactly what you're bringing up in this conversation today?
That's a good question. I just listened to that book. I think it was Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. Did you? Have you seen that?
I have not read it, but yes, I have heard of it.
Yeah, I just and he obviously teamed up with Oprah, the guy who did that, and I thought that was quite interesting. Just having some what might be embarrassing or awkward conversations about all that sort of stuff. That's a good question, Kerry Marie. I'm still working out. I think for me, I just need to get more knowledge.
But the reason I bring that question up is because we often know there's a problem. We often know that there's division. We know that there's an issue. But here's the thing, and I think this is really important as we make a new approach to leadership, that we start going, well, if it wasn't like this, and we were to acknowledge, what does acknowledgement look like? How would that be better? How would it be more effective? How can we do that more, so the next generations don't take this on as part of the DNA for them, And it's like, well, how do we do that? And I think it's by having these conversations that, I didn't even know acknowledgement would be the thing, right? So now that I know that acknowledgement is the thing that would help to bridge that gap from the division that it is now to and healing that pain to where, it has been, to bringing some healing in there. How would I do that? How would I take ownership of that as a leader myself, and as a person that has grown up in my early years in New Zealand as well? So, there's a lot of things that now that we have this awareness, how do we own that? And then how does that bring the change that is needed, obviously, for the people of New Zealand, but also for yourself, because there's I look at you and I hear what you're saying, and I realize that some of that pain of having no voice comes from the pain of having no voice as a tribe, as a heritage, as well as you personally in your own journey as well. And, how can we help to make that better so that we give platforms and safe platforms for voice, and acknowledge that we need to do this? I want to be able to do that better. How can I do it better?
Yeah. I think it's a real strategy to learn how we help people be curious rather than enforce, because I've had a couple of shutdowns in the last couple of weeks with people really close to me just saying, I'm sick of this shit, and I'm like, oh yes, I've actually
Wow.
been so, when things have been happening or these exhibitions on, and it reflects what happened to us, and I'll say, oh, this has happened, but this is on, and then I think they're feeling pressure that this is this, oh well, well, that's what happened, but that's not me, or I don't give a shit about it.
I'm not like that, or that. Why should I worry about that right now?
Yeah. But I got one of these, oh well, white people are doing it tough too, and I was just like, right, okay, so right, yeah.
But here's the thing, like, we're going to have these conversations, and I bring this up as a new approach to leadership. I say that we have to be comfortable with the uncomfortable conversations. We have to know that we're going to come to a table and we're going to have some things that we disagree on. And it's actually okay to disagree on that. What's not okay is to go, because we disagree on all of this, there's not one thing that we can't find that we can agree on, and we can maybe start shifting it forward because we can agree on that piece. And so we're not even having those conversations. How could we start maybe having the conversations to even bring awareness around the fact that, maybe it's around this acknowledgement piece, that how do we even bring people into that conversation, that it's okay to hear? Because I think that there's a truth in so many different perspectives from different colors, whether it's white, black, colored. Like, I often wonder where I fit in on the conversation around racial issues and things like that. Why? Because I have so many good friends. I have been brought up in a lot of areas where across my work, I have worked with so many different cultures. Yet, if you look at my growing up side of me, I was brought up as a white girl. Like, that was my environment. Yet I have been so exposed to culture, and I'm the first to, be in a culture and they go, you're just part of us. Why? Because I love it. And I've embraced it. Like, many times I've been asked if I'm Fijian. Why? Because I spend so much time over there. My work is over there. But the same thing will be every country I go to. I get asked, like in Italy, I was asked, am I Italian? Because I use my hands all the time, But it's because and I bring this up because I think that this is an interesting conversation around racial issues that the world is facing right now. And that is that even within the racial, whether you identify as a black, whether you identify as a brown, colored, whatever it is, right? There is tension even within that culture, that tribe, that thinking within that. And then that makes it even more difficult if you're on an outside of that going, hey, but I'm white, I want to be a part of this. How do I connect with that? How do I bring it that I'm not seen just as a white person, but seen as a, there's Carmen. Say hello to Carmen. She's on here as well. Kia ora, Carmen. She's saying two amazing mana wahine. She just said that. But how do we bridge that gap between maybe what you've grown up in and had to identify with, even if that's not how you identify, or maybe you've been in part of this as what your life is, but realized, hey, there's some amazing things about other cultures, other thinkings. And how do we really, and for me as a new approach to leadership, I keep bringing it back to the conversation going, what if we start with seeing each other as humans first, and then we come with our distinctions. So part of that distinctions is your beautiful culture and what you know, and that the wisdom that you bring from being immersed in as you keep growing through it. I just love watching as you keep developing in what that looks like for you, and then bringing that knowledge to the table. But first, the one thing that we can sort of all relate on is that we're human beings. I know that's probably a weird way to look at it, but I feel like we have to change a lens in which we start having conversations. And one way we can do that and do an even playing field is, well, first, we're humans and we bring distinctions, and I want those distinctions at the table, even if we don't agree. Insights, thoughts around that?
Yeah, it's a big thing. It's So I think Pākehā or white New Zealanders who don't have an understanding or empathy for where we're at is I think they don't realise that when we thrive as Māori, then the whole of New Zealand thrives, because we've got generations of people with dysfunction who are Māori, but they are looked at as if the bigger picture isn't looked at as to how did it get to be that. Like how 3 generations back, what was the story? 4 generations back. So it's people working out how to help people be more inquisitive, because you can't make someone be inquisitive or curious about healing our country. So it's about how in a non-aggressive way that we can share our message that's not confrontational, and then perhaps inviting people to a table, or inviting people to have a conversation where they could probably feel safe. Because I think if you know you're going to get pounded if you come to a table and you've got some views that are different to my views or people of my tribe's views, then I guess they're not necessarily going to want to have those conversations. I think I'm just most excited about that it's starting from childhood. It's now in schools, so it's like, okay, we can't probably do it that much with the older generation because they have their views and they want to call our mountain the name that Captain Cook named it, even though it already had a name, and they'll never call it by its real name because that's just how it was. But the children will know, and their grandchildren and their great grandchildren will know. So they will. It's just like, we'll be refreshed from the ground up. Eventually, it's just my really good friend Jamie's cousin. He is the new CEO of our tribe. He's just come back from Wellington. And I said to him, so how do we have this conversation when people are racist? Because I'm getting it all the time. And he goes, well, put it like this. He said, steal an entire country and then put an education system in that makes you Māori, makes Māori worthless, basically. It tells Māori that they're worthless. He goes, and then now look and this is what we have. So it was kind of like, oh yeah. So you have a system that comes from from Europe, and an education system put in place, and that doesn't suit us here. And you've stolen our whole country was stolen. So it's like, well, yeah, that's kind of like once we acknowledge that, yeah.
Isn't that interesting? There's so much goodness in this, and I think that it begins just with curiosity at the table, and that's kind of why I'm asking these questions, because it's really interesting to hear your insights on it, to hear, and I think that's where, when we're willing to have curiosity at the table, where we're willing to go, I don't know all the answers. I don't know exactly how to make it all right or anything like that, but I'm really willing to start having a conversation. And I think the new approach to leadership for me, that part of that is this willingness to have conversations, not even knowing where we'll take it. Right. But I always go, and we'll do it at the end as we finish. But, always looking back and going, well, there's always one thing at least I can take from this conversation. And I think that's the important thing. If we can just keep, putting this in our conversations and going, it's not that we're going to come up with all the answers, but I think if we keep, and I love the fact that you keep going back, well, the next generation, there is hope for it because it brings change. But that also annoys me, because I go, if the next generation, but what about some of us that maybe weren't able to have that privilege of bringing, having that as part of the growing up? How do we get to, know about this better? And I think that if we are willing to have more of these conversations, then there's room for even those that are of the older generation or the next, not the younger generation. And then, yes, I get it. There are definite people in generations. I look at even my own father who, he's very much what you talk about when you talk about the white thinking and the white way. And not willing to even step over to curiosity at a conversation table, right? Like there's not that in it. But there are some of us out there that are willing, and I think if we can be a leadership now, that in the new approach to leadership, that we have this willingness to go, we don't know it all. We're not even sure, how to bridge this or to narrow that gap. Even how do we do that, or how can we do that? And part of that is just by having these kind of conversations and going, wow, I didn't even look through that lens. I mean, you see that through your camera. You would see a photo that when you do it this way, you see it that way. But when you use a different lens, you begin to see it in a way different sort of image. Or
it's interesting you say lens, because that's kind of a really nicely well used term now. So with our tribal educators, that so there's a book, Ask That Mountain, written in the 1900s by non-Māori, and I said, so what do you think of the history that in this book? And the person responded, well, that's one lens, and then there's another book written by one of us, and so that's through told by a different lens, through a different lens, and blah blah blah. So that lens, that I think that's a really good way of that terminology.
For me, that's the human. That's for me, the lens is the whole using the muscle of human intelligence. In other words, we start using, instead of the old school leadership, which is tell you these are the 3 principles of how to be a leader, and if you do these things, you're going to be a phenomenal leader, right? Because one thing fixes all. Anyway, we won't go there. But when we have a lens in which we start asking questions and we start having curiosity at the table by having these conversations, then we can shift things forward, knowing that we're using lenses that are actually going to be what is needed, is going to be sustainable, is going to be maybe looking at it in a different angle so we actually get a different result, right? Rather than just doing it the old school way or having the same results. And so for me, that's what a lens begins. It creates an awareness of then how do we own it? How do we then change it? And then how does we make sustainable solutions, not just for our generation, but for the generations to come.
Yeah. Well, have you
and that's where I've kind of come from with that.
So have you ever considered that's in your DNA too, the language, and that have you ever considered or been curious about learning it, or felt, what are your feelings around learning?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question because I've come from New Zealand, and we've had this conversation before. There's always been, so the only knowledge I have of my background was that I was born to a full Pākehā European white mama, and she had me at 16, and the father was unknown. So obviously the brown side of me came from something. And I know as a girl growing up, I was classed as very much a white girl in many of my environments, yet I went to a school and my nickname was Black Sabbath because they saw me as the only brown girl at school, or black girl at school. Black Sabbath, was my nickname. And so I grew up going, well, being brown wasn't a positive thing in my primary school. Yet as a teenager, I loved my brown side of me, as in my color of my skin. In fact, I tried to get as brown as I could. I wanted to be as dark as I could. I was so interested in cultures, but it wasn't necessarily just the Māori culture. It became cultures. And I realized one of the things that I really realized was with my global work was I kind of identified as a global child, not as a I'm from this tribe, because I never was really accepted in the, because I don't know my history in that way. I was never really accepted as a in the Māori tribe, yet anytime I was around Māori culture, I was expected to know Māori culture because of the color of my skin. Yet inside the white environments, I was Kirimuri who was brown. So it was, do you know what I mean? So it was kind of not even a thing. It became a thing on my radar because I worked with in the youth and community, and you know, I began doing that in with a lot of street kids in New Zealand, and so it became a part of my learning within the Māori culture on the ground. But I don't know that it was something that I necessarily identified as, or I didn't identify as. I just saw myself, to be honest, I saw myself as a Kiwi, which is kind of like that I didn't see myself black, white, purple, or green. I just saw myself as a Kiwi, and I loved being a Kiwi, and the juices of all those things that came with that, right? And I think I was lucky. I kind of took the good from all of the culture and go, that's me.
Yeah.
And it's only when I have these conversations that I go, do I start feeling guilty that maybe I should have, I could have, or I can now, or I don't know, because I really do identify with a lot of cultures across the world because of I want to learn it all. I don't want to just learn Māori. I want to learn the Fijian. I want to learn Italian. I want to learn Spanish. I'm fascinated to know more about culture as a whole, because I feel then I'm a better human being by learning. So absolutely, if I'm, you know, do I want to know more? Absolutely. And I want to learn more across the globe. And I don't know that that's an answer that from one Kiwi to the others, from one, you know, like that's the acceptable one, but that's how I feel. That's how I look at it through my lens.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's hard, because I know then when I step back into New Zealand, and especially as I've got older, and I'm with any Māori culture, there's an expectation that I should know this, I should be doing this, or I never was brought up that way. I never had that as part of, yeah. And again, is that should, or is it because you just love, and do I love Māori people? Absolutely. Do I love the Māori culture? Absolutely. Am I curious about knowing more about, which is why I've got you here, because I know that you look at it through a really absolute focused lens with Māori culture. And the best way I know is by having these conversations. So yeah, that's kind of my way of starting to want to know more about things. Yeah. Okay, so and the other, sorry, you want to say something on that, right?
No, I would just like to ask you around that, because that is part of your DNA as well, and that's just why I was just seeing if you had what your latest thinking on.
But remember, you need to remember that I was born to a 16-year-old, put up for adoption. I went in and out of families, and they were all white families. There's no brown, you know, Māori culture in that environment at all.
You weren't told who your tribe, what tribe you belong to, so you have those missing, you know, that missing information. I get that.
So there's a lot of that has to come into play. And then how does that fit? Well, I'm kind of an outsider on a lot of things, right? And so how have I dealt with that? You know, that's where I began identifying very much with a lot of cultures across the world, because you know, my Italian beautiful family, they accept me as part of their Italian family when I'm there. They love and like, we're still like, that's part of one of the reasons I hate the borders closed, because I don't get to spend time with my family across the world and in many different environments. You know, it's, I don't know. I've just learned, and I guess that's where I've really learned to just love humanity. I've learned to be curious to how I can be a better human, how I can learn from culture, how I can learn from each one of what you bring to the table, and go, I love that little piece. I want to put that into my DNA, because I feel like, and I think that's why I talk a lot about decision DNA, that we have a choice whether we want to put this into our DNA, and it becomes part of our decisions we make, and then of course builds the culture in which we live in and or lead in many cases.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the new approach to leadership. So but I mean, this is, and as time goes on, Tanya Allen says, great conversation, being open and curious to being a better human and be part of all cultures. For me, that is something that is an intention of mine and a lens in which I use, because there's a lot about particular cultures that are not good, that are not things that I would want to have in my world, and I don't want to take that on, but I want to take on some of the things that are good, the things that are so, like, I love the way, in the Māori culture, with how you see waterways is so important, to see the environment is so important. And I think that probably grew a lot of your love as a photographer as well, like, because you had a love for the land. And I think, we can learn, all of us can learn from that. Tell us, we're finishing up now, but what an amazing conversation. Tell us, firstly, are you all right? You
Yep.
good? Tell us, awesome. Tell us firstly how people can get hold of you if they want to and want to learn more about the Māori culture or more about what you're doing. What's the best way people can get hold of you?
Sure. Well, I just launched my New Zealand website, tanianiwa.com. So that's
beautiful.
That's probably the best way. Or I'm on Instagram or Facebook. So Tania,
all the social things.
Yeah.
Awesome. So from our conversation today, what's one thing you're going to take on, or that you're going to think more about, or whatever? What are you going to take from our conversation?
I'd say it would be around having conversations with people, and in a way that is perhaps non-judgmental, and without
that was the thing that got me too.
Yeah, probably because I have an intention. You know how Oprah says, "What's your intention of this?" Like, so if I'm having conversations that I want them to think a certain way, and I want them to I want to tell them something that I want them to know about our culture it's like actually perhaps not having an intention, more having a conversation. So not having an outcome that I'm trying to control for them, thinking that they need to know something and I need to give them that information. So that doesn't generate curiosity for people necessarily, I would imagine. So learning about how to have some conversations that are more equal than me thinking I'm in a position where I need to tell them something and they need to know something, so they know more about how it is, how our culture
Which I'm sure you often feel when you get on a call with me. Or you have in the past, maybe.
Think about, you mean like just not having not having no idea where it's going to go. You mean being open to being open to,
but even just with the Māori culture and your understanding of it, and the need that I need to know that, because that's where I've come from as well, and things like that side of it,
I need to let it go.
Which is actually why this conversation is a uncomfortable conversation for me, to be honest, because I never want to insult, I never want to upset, I never want you to feel that I don't want to be a part of. I just want to, and that's why, from me, the thing that I've got from this is the fact that we can have a curiosity conversation. We can be okay to have this conversation, and I feel really comfortable with that. I feel really comfortable with that. We're not confronting about this and saying, hey, this is how it should be, and this is because that goes, I don't want to even have to go there if that's the part of it, you know what I mean? Whereas there's a willingness to go, oh, I'd love to know a bit more about that, or I don't know. For me, that was such a good moment to, and that was the thing that I will take from this conversation, is the power of a conversation that is curiosity conversation. And how can we have those with maybe things that are absolutely kind of no-go zones in general, often across the globe, that maybe we have a conversation like that where how do you make it less confrontational? Like that to me is a good question to be asking myself as I continue to have conversations in this need, what I feel is a need in the new approach to leadership. So that's kind of what I've got from that. Anything you want to leave? We have gone, and I know you really had no idea, but I kind of like the fact you had no idea, because then we can.
We never know. I never know where I'm going to go with you, which is great. Yeah.
It is great, because I don't know if we had pre-planned this, if we would have had this conversation to the same degree. But I know, and I hope the listeners that have been on the call and listened to the replay as well, that this sparks a curiosity in their thinking, in the way that they may lead in their own world or have conversations with other people. And, you know, where there is so much division across the world, and it seems to be increasing rather than decreasing in many cases. And so it becomes almost this, well, it's just too big and huge now, we won't even go there. And I never want us to get to that point that we feel this, because then we all give up. There's no opportunities. There's no options to bring change. And my hope is that this new approach to leadership gives us hope in a pathway forward where we can start, you know, having it. I just want to finish up with Tanya Allen. She says, I see Tanya's point of view also where foundations and values of certain cultures are being lost, which we don't want, right? Unless we encourage the younger generation to learn more about the culture they were born into. Would you agree with that? Yeah.
If you don't know who you are and what your history of your people were, and then you're missing, you're not complete. There's parts of you that are missing that you don't understand.
Yeah. Is there anything you want to leave everyone with? This is your time for your voice.
Yeah.
Platform, and a very safe one, because there's no judgment at all.
I think it's when people have a judgment or a certain view on people, and people who may be dysfunctional or lower socio or not presenting themselves well, then when you look at them and think, oh, that race is inferior, or those people are inferior, and that's what they're all like, is actually think, what's the bigger picture here? How did they get to that point? So what happened to their parents? What had happened to their grandparents, their great-grandparents, and how did colonization affect what we have now? Just to think that, and maybe just hold the judgment back and just be curious as to, so how did it get to that point?
Oh, I love that. Hold the judgment back and just be curious. That's your phrase I've got from today.
Yep.
I love that. That is beautiful. And what a great way to end. Okay, so if anyone's loved this, I've loved this. I am just so grateful for my friends that come on here just to have a daily conversation and know that I'll just go anywhere and everywhere, and I do. So I'm just so grateful. If you've got things out of this, if this has helped you, let's get the word out to how we can, maybe start being curious of our new approach to how we do things, and a hope and a pathway forward. Make sure you share this. Make sure you get it, out to people, because that's giving voice to something that maybe hasn't had a voice in the past, and we want to change that going forward. So thank you again, Tanya, for very much for being here. You're a beautiful, beautiful soul. And I'm so grateful from the moment that I remember doing a photo shoot with you many, many, many moons ago. And I remember not feeling confident of being the one that was being photographed. And yet you just had a beautiful way in which you took me on that journey, and it felt safe, and it felt like from those photos it began giving me a voice. And so I am so honored always to have you in my world. And I'm looking forward to seeing how 21 unfolds even more so for you.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks for your support, and what would you say, for challenging me along the way, and also, yeah, giving me lots of tools along the way to bring me forward. Yeah, and to you always said to me, I'll be one of your clients one day, and I always thought, really? Will I? Oh my gosh, that's exciting.
Because I saw in you so much more than you saw in yourself at that time.
Yeah. And that's good. It's like, yes, we've come a long way together. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you for your support. Okay.
You're very welcome. And I'm just going to end the broadcast now.